Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Bryce Lewis, and we have another great show for you today, talking about all things basketball. We're going to talk about a lot of updates coming out of the league when it comes to the resumption of the season that is coming up, obviously with the NBA approving the 22-team plan to bring back every team in the NBA in that group. So obviously, that's obviously very exciting that I reported on last week. But obviously, they're still working out the kinks. They've been able to decide some dates and a couple other things. And there's some other things they're still working on and trying to figure out, which I'll keep you updated on going into this episode and going on and so forth and so on throughout the rest of the offseason until the season starts again. Obviously, we clearly have some, like I said, more news and notes to talk about coming out of the Basketball Association. We also have a couple of other things. Obviously, players are still protesting. A lot of speeches and a lot of sayings are still being said out in today's world with everything going on in the real world. So obviously, we're going to talk about that and more right here on the podcast. So, we're just going to jump right into it right now. We're going to talk about Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant have ruled themselves out for this season that is coming back, as they have chosen not to suit up this season and wait till the next season the next basically season to start up and then play. Obviously, this was to be expected because of the fact that it was highly unlikely KD was going to come back. He's been saying regardless of the postponement, he wasn't coming back to play in this season. They're not trying to rush him back on the floor. You've heard the Nets brass even say that. So they're not going to bring back KD unless they actually absolutely need it to, which in this situation, they kind of look at the season. They know the season's a wash. They don't have a head coach. They're probably just like, we'll wait till we get everything together before we bring Kevin Durant back. In Kyrie's situation, obviously Kyrie got hurt during the season. The season hasn't gone that great with Kyrie, so I can understand maybe Kyrie thinking, I'm just going to wait again until everything has been settled. KD comes back, we get a new head coach, we know what our team looks like next year, and then we try to work ourselves into it. Obviously, I'll talk about this more in detail later in the show, but the NBA is trying to figure out a rule or a system for replacing players just in case you have a player who was hurt during the season that's not coming back, or if a player gets COVID. So obviously, they said the Nets will probably get the option to replace both Kyrie and KD. And obviously, it'll be interesting to see, obviously, who Brooklyn may decide to replace them with. There are some good free agents out there. It'll be interesting, if you're a free agent, maybe you didn't play this entire season potentially, and did you just get a call right in the middle of everything that's going on right now and saying, hey, we need you to suit up and we need you to play basketball. That probably would be a very interesting situation and scenario, and just a very interesting concept in general. So that's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Obviously, again, we know, like I said, where the Nets are right now. They're currently the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. They could become the 8th seed if Orlando comes back from this hiatus and wins more games than them, because it's not a big deficit between the two teams. And then they'll be in the 8th spot, and then if the Wizards can get within 4.5 games, they'll have to play the Wizards to get into the playoffs. So obviously, that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Obviously, everybody feels like, well, Brooklyn doesn't even need to be in the playoffs if there's no Kyrie or KD, because what is the value of this team? Spencer Dinwiddie's a good player, but nobody's coming to watch Spencer Dinwiddie and Chris LeVert. So I think, obviously, if you're the Nets, you also may feel that lack of urgency in knowing the season really isn't going to go very far with the guys you have currently on your roster, because you know what's going on. So you may even see them in the way they coach, in the way their camps go, in the way in games. Maybe the urgency from the Nets isn't there because they kind of know there's not much to fight for in the season. It's like, we're just going to play these 8 games, get eliminated in the first round, go home. So it'll be interesting to see the motivation and the demeanor of the players going into it, because we don't know how they're going to take it. We don't know how they're going to go about dealing with everything that is going on. So, obviously that's going to be a good thing. That's going to be a very interesting situation, obviously. And everybody's obviously waiting for when KD and Kyrie do return. Obviously, that's the duo that is projected to bring Brooklyn a championship. And so we have yet to see them both on the floor together. And we kind of, at this point, know what Kyrie is without KD. So, or just in general by himself when he's leading a team. So obviously it's going to be very interesting to see when they both get on the floor. And then again, also who they bring in as the next head coach of the team. Because obviously that will be a very big meshing point, because you want everything to work out. You don't want the potential of people not getting along, people, struggling to, mesh, because you don't want that messing with the rest of the team's chemistry. Obviously, if your two top players are not sold on Kenny Atkinson, then clearly that must mean that a lot of people aren't sold on, the team. So you definitely want to address that. You definitely want to get rid of that. You definitely don't want those to be lingering issues going into the season that's coming back and into next season as well. So I'm sure the Brooklyn Nets have a lot of decisions they need to make, but I'm sure they're going to do what they need to do to make the decisions that they need to help put themselves in the best position so they can win next year when they do run it back for the 2020-21 season. So it'll definitely be an interesting season to say the least. But that's the news on Kyrie and KD. Now, in other news, the NBA, obviously, there's no crowds. Obviously, we're going to be hearing games with no crowds. Obviously, that could be just a glorified pickup game at that point. So the NBA, and this is something the NFL even thought about doing as well, might experiment with using 2K crowd noise to help give the game some type of a crowd feel. Because everybody knows just watching two teams play basketball could be boring. Because it's just like, where is the excitement? Where is the energy coming from? Maybe adding some type of crowd noise can at least still give it a realistic presentation of a real game going on right now, and make the game more enjoyable to watch potentially. So they're obviously going to experiment with that. Now, we don't know if they're actually going to do it. It's something they're thinking about doing. Obviously, if you've seen people in the comments, a lot of people are just like, I don't think using a 2K noise or crowd animation is going to make the games that much better, because it has to match up with what's going on the floor. How are you going to make it match up? You know what I'm saying? So I'm sure that will be interesting if they actually decide to do it. Everybody's like, if that's the case, you might as well put all the 2K features. You might as well put David Aldridge in there, so I can skip over him. You know what I'm saying? You might as well put everything that 2K has and that animation on the game in real life if you can, and see how it works. Because obviously, like I said, the NBA is going to experiment with, again, trying to give the most realistic presentation possible to the fans, which makes sense, because you don't want to give the fans a very stale product. Because, yeah, you might have the nostalgia of basketball coming back, and that may make you look over it. But think about watching it now, game after game, for months with no crowd. That could actually work against the NBA. So, like I said, I understand why they're trying to see how can we make this game as realistic as possible. And make it where it feels like we're still in a game. You still got the crowd. You still have the players. You still have the announcers. All of that. And it feels authentic. And so that way, as a fan, you can still be invested in the game. Because obviously that's the biggest things. They want you to still be invested in the game and not be turned off by what's going on out there. Because obviously that's not going to be good for business. But that's all the news we have for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into Greg Popovich. He gave a powerful, powerful speech about what's going on in this country. I'll talk about that next. And also Michael Jordan and the Jordan brand dating $100 million over the next 10 years to help out in black communities and things that have been affected by the police brutality. All that, here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down the Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving ruling out that they will be returning for this season that is coming back, as they will decide to go ahead and sit it out. Obviously, we'll have to see how that affects the Brooklyn Nets, as that pretty much ends their season officially, even though they still have a season, but we realistically know they won't be able to make any noise in the playoffs, and they're just basically just finishing the season because of his own obligational duty. But we pretty much know what they're going to be and how it's going to go when they get out there. I also talked about the NBA using 2K crowd noise potentially to help make the game be more realistic as a true experience, trying to use some type of crowd noise to still give that game that authenticness, because obviously it could be a little weird watching just guys play basketball on TV with no crowd. It's like you're just watching a street ball game almost, in a way. And obviously I'm sure the NBA doesn't want that to be the case. So they're going to go ahead and try to maybe experiment with some NBA 2K fan noise. So we'll have to see if they actually decide to do that and how it will go when it actually happens. But, so, obviously, as you know what's going on in the country right now with all the protests and everything, Black Lives Matter and etc. Obviously, I've spoken on this podcast, especially last episode, players and coaches. I've been actively in the community and making speeches and basically, making their voices be heard. And obviously, one guy who's always been very vocal about these issues and has so much respect in the league from so many players, Greg Popovich, he came out and he had a speech, it's like a small monologue about what's going on in the country right now. And obviously, everybody has applauded him for what he has done. It was a great speech, absolutely great speech. And Greg's always been very vocal about what has happened. Very vocal about the status of the world. And he'll say things that need to be said. And I'm gonna share with y'all what he said. If y'all haven't watched it yet, I'm gonna tell y'all what he said, sum up what he said. Obviously, to sum it up, at first, Greg Popovich basically said the country is in trouble and that he is embarrassed as a white person because of what happened with George Floyd. And, he called it out, clearly, as everybody has. And in his statement that he made in his video, he said, in a strange, counterintuitive sort of way, the best teaching moment of this recent tragedy, I think, was the look on the officer's face. For white people to see how nonchalant, how casual, just how every day going about his job, so much so that he could just put his left hand in his pocket, wiggle his knee a little bit around, a little bit to teach this person some sort of lesson, and that it was his right and duty to do it in his mind. I don't know. I think I'm just embarrassed as a white person to know that that can happen to actually watch a lynching. We've all seen books, and you look in books and you see black people hanging off trees and you are amazed. But we just saw it again. I never thought I'd see that. with my own times in real time. As you can obviously tell from these words, deep words from Greg, because Greg knows how serious the situation is. He understands what's going on. And Greg, just like I said, has always been a guy who has been outspoken, even against, Trump. I'm not going to get you political, but I'm just saying, this reporting facts of like he's been spoken out against Trump, and he's been spoken out against any type of racial injustice in the world. And, basically, again, to sum up, basically something he said in what he said was, it's got to be us that speak truth to power, that calls it out no matter the consequences. We have to not let anything go. Our country is in trouble, and the basic reason is race. And obviously, Pop was praised for this. Pop, has just, he's doing what Pop does. And that's one reason why some people, again, think Pop is one of the greatest coaches of all time. Not only for what he does on the court, but also off the court. And I think that's one thing that makes it great. It makes it fantastic. So, that was great what Greg said. And, listen, Greg's obviously gearing up for the Spurs coming back, trying to make a playoff push to hopefully make the playoffs. But as well, he probably knows that's just a part of it. The bigger thing is what's happening in the world right now. And obviously Greg's always going to be one of the top people to always say what he needs to say. And he's a class act and definitely represents the Spurs in a great way. But also in other news, the Jordan brand and Michael Jordan are donating $100 million over the next 10 years to organizations ensuring racial equality, social justice, and education. I'll read to you the statement by the Jordan brand, and I'll read to you what Jordan said himself. The Jordan brand said this: "The Jordan brand is us, the black community. The Jordan brand is more than one man. It has always been a family. We represent a proud family that has overcome obstacles, fought against discrimination in communities worldwide, and that works every day to ease and stand the stain of racism and damage of injustice. The will, the work, the excellence the world has come to know is the result of one generation after another pouring their dreams into the next. It's 2020, and our family now includes anyone who aspires to our way of life. Yet, as much as things have changed, the worst remains the same. Black Lives Matter. This is not a controversial statement until the ingrained racism that allows our country's institutions to fail completely eradicated. We will remain committed to protecting and improving the lives of black people. Today, we are announcing that Michael Jordan and Jordan Brand will be donating $100 million over the next 10 years to organizations dedicated to ensuring racial equality, social justice, and greater access to education." So obviously, that was Jordan Brand making their own statement, right? Now, this is what Jordan said in his statement about what happened with George Floyd and just in general, what the Jordan brand is doing. "I don't have the answers, but our collective voices show strength and inability to be divided by others. We must listen to each other, show compassion and empathy, and never turn our backs on senseless brutality. We need to continue peaceful expressions against injustice and demand accountability. Our unified voices need to put pressure on our leaders to change our laws. Or also, we need to use our vote to create systematic change. Every one of us needs to be a part of the solution, and we must all work together to ensure justice for all." So obviously, again, that was the statement from Jordan. So obviously, this is going to be a tremendous donation from the brand. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest donations, if not the biggest donation that's actually been made by anybody or any company to the cause. And obviously, this is big for Jordan. This continues to obviously it's funny because, Jordan's really been picking up steam with the Last Dance documentary. Now it's like, dang, Jordan really that guy. And, it's just great to see the outpouring of support by Jordan and the Jordan brand, one of the biggest brands in the country, because if they're taking this seriously, one of the biggest brands in all of the world, then that there's an impact being felt. But coming up next on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, the NBA is wanting to arrange OTAs for teams that are not a part of the 22 teams. And also, I'll continue to update you on players continuing to protest around their respective cities. Right here and more. And if you want to stay tuned for all that here and more, listen to this podcast. Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down Greg Popovich's speeches. I told you, I didn't tell you all of it, but I told you most of his speech, what he said, word for word, what he said. Obviously, dropping a very powerful speech by Pop. Obviously, just a great man, great with his words, and great about, adjusting issues that are very much active in our country. So obviously, Greg Popovich doing Greg Popovich things, and like I said, he's gearing up to get his team ready for the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the Spurs get back on the court and Greg Popovich tries to get his boys ready to make a push. We also talked about how the Jordan brand and Michael Jordan are donating $100 million over the next 10 years to communities to help fight racial inequality, social justice, and improve education. Obviously, one of the biggest donations that I can remember anybody's made in a while. So, obviously, the Jordan brand taking this seriously. Jordan really taking this seriously. Obviously, you can tell, like I said, with this, what's happening in the world, people are taking it seriously. So, it's great. But now we're going to get back to some basketball real quick. So, the NBA, reportedly, is motivated to arrange OTA for teams that are not involved in the restart plan. Obviously, this is important because if you know, teams that are not in that 22 teams, their biggest issue is they don't want to go from March to December playing no basketball. They want to be able to have some type of work, some type of something to get experience, to still train, to still practice as a team, to still, basically do things. So the NBA is trying to arrange some things to help teams still be able to play, or at least be able to train, practice, do whatever, have little camps and everything to help with those teams. So it's not like they're picking up a basketball literally in November trying to get ready for December. Like they're like, y'all have gotten to warm up, y'all have gotten to train, y'all have gotten to practice, and now you're able to get back out there and play. Obviously, as you know, the NBA season is going to resume on July 21st. Not 21st, 31st. So, and like I said, the 8 teams that didn't make it were Golden State, Minnesota, the Minnesota Timberwolves, Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, the Detroit Pistons, New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls, and the Charlotte Hornets. Obviously, a league official said that the 8 teams who are not playing need parameters and guidelines for offseason work. The hope is to get clarity at some point so all these teams can start organizing and planning their offseasons. Because obviously their off-seasons have officially started. So obviously, you got to give them ability to actually train. Now, if you want to know the actual, what we know already for what the dates are coming into the season, is that training camp for the NBA will begin July 9th to July 11th. The 2019-2020 season will resume July 31st through October 12th. The draft lottery will be August 25th. So if you want to know if your team's getting the first overall draft pick, put that date down. August 25th will be the draft lottery. And then August 15th will be the NBA draft. So that will be 3 days after the last potential game could be played in the NBA of Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Then free agency starts 3 days later, October 18th. So now after you get your players, because usually it's free agency, then draft. This year it's draft, then free agency. So that's a change. That might change the plans of some teams. Then after free agency, then you have the 2020-21 training camp starting November 10th. If they say supposedly the season will start on December 1st. Now, like I said, I have a report later kind of disputing that, but we'll see if it sticks. Right now, that's what they're saying. Because, like I said, this isn't the official, this is the target NBA schedule. So this is what they currently want to do, but it's not quote unquote set in stone right now. But this is the layout right now. A lot of these dates will probably happen. The start of the season is going to be iffy. We'll have to see. But that's the target schedule right now. And obviously, Adrian Wojnarowski reported Friday that eliminated teams are seeking unprecedented off-season access to players, and relayed a list of 4 ideas front offices have proposed to the league. So this is what they've been proposing to the league to help with the teams who haven't been able to start back with the rest of the teams in the 22. A combination of voluntary and mandatory workouts for 2 weeks in July, regional mini camps in August that include joint practices for periods of days, and approximately 3 televised games. So this is like pickup games, basically. Organized team activities, OTAs, for mid-September. And then teams want an opportunity for training camps to start 7 to 10 days earlier for the 2020-2021 teams. Well, the season for those teams left out of Orlando. So obviously, that's the plan right now. That's what they're looking at. That's what they want. That's what the teams that are not in it want. And that's what's going to be interesting to see if the NBA, actually goes ahead and goes with that plan, goes with that saying, goes with what they want to do. So obviously that's going to be a big thing. That's going to be a big thing. And we'll have to see. So that's the plan. That's the idea. That's the idea. Can't hate on it. Can't be mad at it. I hope they can, because like I said, the teams that aren't playing, they don't want to just, boom, training camp, now we get to practice. They want to be able to have time to really still try to develop their teams that they have while the season's going on, so it's not like they're left out. And listen, what's the worst that can happen if they have like 3 televised games? Oh, we have a scrimmage going on. Why not? It's almost like just a fun little insider type of thing you can have for the NBA. Provides a more open access, and everybody loves access nowadays, so that definitely wouldn't hurt the NBA if they allowed it. But I also want to talk about players still actively in the protest game. Still, obviously, Russell Westbrook was speaking to a huge crowd today of protesters in Compton, California. One of his quotes is, "In times like this, we need to stick together." So obviously Russ going out of his way, making an impact. Like I said, you've seen it all over. Players are out in the communities. They're out trying to say what they need to say, do what they need to do, try to do anything to help bring awareness to the situation, and do anything they can to be as effective as they possibly can be in helping the cause. Then also, Giannis was at a Milwaukee protest, and he said, "This is for unity. We want change. We want justice." So again, NBA players still out, about, doing what they need to do, speaking, all of it. DeMar DeRozan was also out there with Russell Westbrook. I mean, you see it all around. I mean, John Wall as well. He joined a protest in DC. He said, "We demand," it's just so many things happening. Steph and Alicia Curry are still out there protesting. I mean, it's beautiful to see, man. It's great to see the activeness in the activism from all of our players in the NBA. And it makes you really just grow and have even more of an appreciation for them and everything they do because of what they're doing, going out of their way, taking time out of their lives to help support the cause. But coming up next, the NBA is trying to plan how to replace players. What's going to be the system for during this coming season for if somebody gets COVID or somebody gets hurt. And also, the playoff standings will not be determined by actual record, but by winning percentage, since every team won't be able to play the same number of games. So if you want to find out about more of that and the rest of basketball news I might have to talk about, stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down the NBA wanting to arrange OTAs and other off-season camps and training for the teams that weren't part of the 22 teams that will come back for the season to resume. So, and we broke down all the ideas, everything that was said, thought, and planned out, and ideas that were pitched, as obviously those teams definitely still want some type of action, even though they're not a part of the actual season anymore, and their season has officially ended. We also talked about, just shortly, about players still out there protesting, speaking up, joining in, supporting, again, showing love to all those players who are out here going out of their way to help make a difference in their communities, in their respective areas of home, in their home cities, anything. All of it. It's an absolutely beautiful sight to see, and you just love to see it. You really do just love to see it. So we'll have to see how it goes from here on out. But now we're going to get to some more news on the NBA. So obviously I discussed earlier with Brooklyn that obviously the Nets are going to have a chance to replace Kyrie and KD through some of the system that the NBA is still discussing on how to actually implement about players that can be replaced. Because they're trying to discuss how they replace players with COVID-19 diagnoses or injuries. So according to this Bleacher Report article by Blake Schuster, he said that now the NBA has decided to bring back 22 teams. Now they're trying to figure out what happens if a player gets injured and can't play out the season. So ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski and Bobby Marks report the league is working on mechanisms that will be used to replace participants should injuries or a positive coronavirus test keep an athlete off the court once teams report to Orlando. Obviously, the NBA and its teams are working together to present a solution to the players' union, because obviously they have to present it to them, to then present to the players, and then they'll go from there. Per Wojnarowski and Marks, if COVID-19 or a serious injury strikes a team during training camp or the 8 regular season or the 8 regular seeding games, there is an expectation there to be no limitations on the number of players a team could sign to replace those lost. But there would be a restriction on those pool of eligible players. These are among a long list of items the NBA and the National Basketball Players Association will have to negotiate to completion in the next week, sources said. The NBA can make its recommendations to the union, but they'll have to agree upon changes to the collective bargaining agreement that'll shape the NBA's 22-team restart at Disney. Obviously, replacement players that they discuss in this article that could be available in the pool are G League players, clearly, or players who have previously signed with NBA training camp contracts. But signing players like a J.R. Smith or international players is currently not on the table, as they were not either in camp nor were they in the system of the NBA during this past cycle. Now, obviously, Wojnarowski and Marks in this article said that teams hope the league will reconsider its stance on prohibiting players on two-way deals to join NBA clubs in Orlando, while the NBA is looking to keep the number of people at the bubble site to a reported 1,600. Clubs would like the assurance and the flexibility to having reserve players available should a member of their roster be unable to play. Which would be smart because obviously you may not need them always to suit up, but if somebody goes down, it's like, well, you don't have to sign a guy, then they have to go through the process of flying into Orlando, getting a test. You already have them there, you already have them tested, you just got them. So it's like, okay, you're down, okay, we need you to slide in there for the next game. Makes the process much simpler. So I can understand why teams would want to have that. It's a much easier and flexible process if you do it that way. So it's definitely understandable why a team would want that, clearly. Another option, though, discussed in this article, being discussed, is a requirement that players who are replaced on the roster are not permitted to return to play for the duration of the season, whether that is due to injury or in case of COVID-19. I think that's just to keep consistency. You never know what happens. You know, a player gets out for a couple of weeks. You don't know what he gets into. You don't want to take that chance of bringing him back. I think they're just trying to be very careful with this rule. I think that's why they have the rule in place. They're just trying to be very, very careful about what they do and not allowing players just to roam too much even after injuries or even if they clear injury because it's just like, we're just going to keep you out. That could create another potential dilemma for individual clubs as the league will reportedly require players to quarantine for at least a week following a positive test. But there is still time to reach, so there's no necessary rush on this decision. So that's the plan right now with the NBA moving forward. And I think, honestly, seeing it makes sense. It does. It makes a lot of sense. They're just trying to be safe. They're trying to be smart, and they're not trying to rush anything and put anybody into a bad situation. So I think the NBA is just, obviously they have time to talk about it. Both sides will represent what they want to say, what they think should happen, what they think would be best in the case of both sides. It'll be interesting to see maybe what the decision is at the end of the day that they actually decide to come up with when it comes to how they're going to handle all of that and the procedures and all the rules and regulations that they're going to require to make sure that they can have everything safely but done correctly as well. Also, the NBA playoff seeding will not be based off record because not every team is going to play the same number of games. Because it has been said, if your schedule includes one of the 8 teams that are not in the season, that you will skip over the next game to the next game. So clearly, not everybody's going to play 8 games. So obviously, according to Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press, any teams that are tied in winning percentage will have their playoff seeding determined by standard NBA tiebreakers. Head-to-head record is the first tiebreaker, followed by division winner or higher division winning percentage. If the teams are in the same division, then the higher conference winning percentage. Obviously, it is noted in this article that it is significant that the standings will be determined based off winning percentage since some teams have a different amount of games played. Because don't forget, everybody's coming back not playing the same amount of games and still only just getting 8. So don't forget that either. The top 7 seeds, just as a reminder, will make the playoffs, and there will be a play-in series between the 8th and 9th teams in each conference, provided that the 9th place team is within 4 games. The number 8 seed would have to win 1 game to qualify for the playoffs, while the 9th seed would have to win twice. winning percentage could play a significant role in the Western Conference especially. So, obviously, that's going to be very interesting to see. Obviously, an example they listed was Portland, who's ninth in the West right now at 29-37. Both behind them are the Pelicans and the Sacramento Kings. The Portland has played 2 more games than each of those teams and went 1-1, thus giving it a higher winning percentage. So, because of that, the Kings and the Pels and all of them have to have must have a better record than the Blazers in Orlando to pass them, since the tie would go to Portland based off his winning percentage. So that's just an example of how that would work in terms of winning percentages in that situation. So it will be interesting to see what happens again. This season coming back is going to be very wonky, very weird, but very interesting to me at the same time. So that's just one of the things that they're doing when trying to bring the season back. But coming up next, we're going to discuss some things that have been told to the players. Like the players have told December 1st for the season to start is unlikely. And also they've also told the players when they come to Disney what they can and cannot do when they're there. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed the NBA trying to plan how to replace players through a system where, all these nooks and crannies about what if they get COVID, the system for that. What if somebody gets hurt, the system for that. They're still working on it. They have plenty of time to work out the kinks. There's a lot of things being discussed. There's a lot of things on the table. I just gave y'all a little bit of an insight into what that potentially was. I also let y'all know that the tourneys will now be decided by winning percentage, because not every team has played the same amount of games coming back. So some teams have the advantage right out the gate because of that, while other teams have to now do a little bit more to jump over certain teams. And I gave an example with the Portland Trailblazers, with the Kings and the Pels, based off winning percentage, because Portland has played 2 more games than both of those teams. So obviously that's what's going on there. So we're going to talk about the NBA. The NBA PA, might be Pacific, has reportedly told players that starting the 2020-2021 season on December 1st is unlikely. Now, obviously, the NBA season is set to resume Friday, July 31st, obviously following a 4-game suspension due to COVID. And the campaign can last as late as October 12th, when Game 7 of the NBA Finals is scheduled. So that calls into the question the start of the 2020-2021 season, and there appears to be a disagreement between the NBA and the NBA PA. Per Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN, the NBA is looking towards a tentative start date of December 1st, with November 10th being the start of training camp. But Shams Charania of the Stadium and The Athletic reported that the NBA PA told its players on call December 1st is unlikely, and would most likely be negotiated. Now, the NBPA director, Michelle Roberts, told Wojnarowski she would be surprised if they start the season on December 1st. The date would provide hope that the 2020-2021 season earns in early summer, giving the league enough time to get back on its regular scheduled track for 2021-2022. However, it is likely not enough time for the players to recover in between seasons, especially with the NBA Finals participants having less than 1 month of downtime between Game 7, if that was necessary, and the start of training camp. The NBAPA would have to approve such a calendar year for those types of changes, per Wojnarowski. So a shutdown there on the players' union's end would lead to the league heading back to the drawing board. Now, Wojnarowski did write that the proposed start date would have no effect on the 8 teams that were not invited, clearly. So, furthermore, the bulk of the 22 teams headed to Florida would see their seasons end early to mid-September per the timeline, giving those franchises more breathing room between campaigns. Wojnarowski also provided more details as to why an earlier start would be beneficial to the league. And I quote, Wojnarowski saying, starting the season in early December would allow many NBA players to participate in the 2020-2021 Tokyo Olympics and would avoid the back end of the NBA playoffs, draft, free agency, and fighting for attention with the start of the 2020-2021 NFL season. Still, a December 1st start seems unlikely given the NBAPA's initial pushback, plus the small window between years for teams making deep postseason runs. Obviously, there's a very good points here. I mean, you don't want to rush those teams that played in the finals back within a month and say, okay, yeah, I get back up for the season. I think you got to think about, okay, we don't want to put them at a disadvantage because they play later in the season. Because you never want to give anybody a competitive advantage because of that. So maybe starting around maybe mid-December and maybe pushing it back could be more beneficial. So you got to figure out what is best for both sides. You know, you don't want to rush anything. You don't want to, again, put the players at risk from a health perspective by not giving them enough time to play. So I would think if maybe you could push it back to mid-December, maybe as close as you can to Christmas, maybe you might be able to fit that in. Because I don't think you should be worried about maybe dealing with NBA, NFL preseason. I think just that should give you enough time if you started around Christmas. Because that will give the teams that played in late October at least almost a full 2 months to like kind of really recover, get themselves back. You start training camp maybe December 1st, potentially. You could do it then. And then, obviously, the teams that play later can take maybe more of a load off because they've played more recently. And then they can kind of take that time to rest up. While the teams that obviously haven't played in a while will obviously take that time and do a little bit more. Because obviously they're trying to get back and they're trying to get ready for the next upcoming season that is about to be played. So obviously that's what's going on there. For those people who wonder if it's going to work, we just have to see. But the NBAPA also said to the players and their families coming to Orlando, which is from Adrian Wojnarowski in his words. He says, for those visiting Disney World this summer and hoping to see an active NBA player roaming around the parks and getting on rides, Well, the NBA PA made it clear that won't be happening for players nor family members that joined them. So obviously that means the NBA is saying your family cannot go out, you cannot go out. Obviously this is a part of their initiative to make sure everybody is safe and no one is putting themselves at risk. So they're doing what they have to do to protect themselves and make sure none of their players potentially end up getting COVID-19 because they want to go out and do that, be around Disney World and try to enjoy themselves. And also protecting the families because, again, they don't want families coming out there trying to enjoy themselves. They get COVID, gives it to the player. You know, that they're obviously trying to make sure that doesn't happen. That would be one of the worst case scenarios. So that would be very interesting. So some people may think they're taking away some fun, but at the end of the day, you know, this is a safety thing for them, and it's big for them not to allow anything bad to happen to their players and etc. So we gotta hang in there, stick with the NBA on this one, and not overreact to that. You know, because you just got safety first. Like I said, safety first. So, but coming up next, we're gonna talk more basketball news, all that right here and more on the podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment. The NBA the NBA PA, gotta make it clear. The NBA PA told players it is unlikely that December 1st, for the next season to start is unlikely. As they don't like that, they think they need to push it maybe a little bit deeper into December. Also, the NBA told the players and their families, listen, do not go out to Disney World and enjoy yourself. Because we don't need anybody y'all getting corona, giving it to the players, it spreads, all because y'all wanting to go to Disney World. I understand. You want to. I understand. You would love to. But you gotta do what's in the best interest of the league, the teams, the players, and their families. So that was the news we talked about last segment. Now we're going to talk about some news this segment. Matt Barnes, obviously host of the podcast on Showtime. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's a really popular podcast. I've watched it a few times. Matt Barnes has said that he feels like some NBA players are uncomfortable playing amid social injustices. And I will read this article to you from Bleacher Report as well on this. While the NBA Players Association approved the league's 22-team plan to finish the 2019-2020 season following a hiatus because of COVID-19 pandemic, a number of players apparently are not comfortable taking the court again until police brutality and racial equality issues that have dominated headlines of late are fully addressed. During a conversation with Josiah Johnson for Yahoo Sports Dunkbait, former player Matt Barnes says a couple of guys from the Lakers and Clippers, there are some whispers about some teams not being comfortable. Some guys want to play and some don't want to play. So that's very interesting, just in case we get close to the season and you start maybe hearing names of players who may not actually want to come back and play. Because I'm sure with everything going on, I'm sure players are very listen, this is going on in the world. I don't know if I want to play right now if all this is going on. We still have to live in that society we've been living in. So I can definitely understand it. But continuing in the article, the killing of George Floyd on May 25th sparked nationwide protests that have lasted for nearly 2 weeks and are aimed at addressing racism and police brutality. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, while the other 3 officers involved arrested were charged with aiding and abetting a second-degree murder and aiding and abetting a second-degree manslaughter. Video captured by a bystander revealed Chauvin's kneeling on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, while the latter said he could not breathe and he pleaded for his life. Obviously, I've already mentioned again, a number of NBA players have attended or spoken at ensuing protests, including 3-time champion Steph Curry and MVP candidate Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obviously, like I said, it'll be interesting if any players actually speak out and say, hey, I'm not comfortable coming back because of what's going on. I think that definitely would be interesting if somebody actually went out and said that, because we don't know if anybody actually will. Because sometimes you don't know, is it a main player? Is it a bench player? Is it a role player? Like, who is it? You always want to know who it is. You always want to know who it is. So, obviously, that's going to be very interesting to, again, keep an eye on and see what could happen. Also, if you want to see something cool that 2K is doing, 2K is supporting racial equality by putting in their game free in-game gear as they created I Can't Breathe, Black Lives Matter, Say Their Names tees as well, shirts that you can wear in the game. So if you're wanting to upgrade your 2K character with some of the latest merch supporting social injustice, there you go right there. 2K got the hooked up for you for free. So obviously that's going to be something that I'm sure will intrigue some people. I'm sure it will very much intrigue some people. We'll just have to see how it all turns out. Also, Michael Jordan obviously was a part of, the process of deciding how the league was going to come back. And Adam Silver said that a part of making the format is that Michael Jordan told Adam, listen, if I was you, I wouldn't put a gimmicky format, which is probably the World Cup in there. Keep it simple, simplistic, to the point, very minimum change, and get your results. Which is why the play-in is very easy. The group stage makes things kind of wacky, wonky, gimmicky, So obviously that probably is one of the reasons why they aimed in the direction they aimed with the schedule. Because Jordan said, hey, let's not do anything too crazy. Let's keep it simple, where we can still get the answers and results that people want at the end of the day, but also not make it too complicated for the players and people watching at home. So obviously, it's interesting to see how Jordan still is included in on the process. Obviously, that's something that has happened. Also, AI's birthday was on Saturday, I believe. So happy birthday to AI, one of the best scoring guards in the NBA history. Revolutionized the game, really changed the game. People don't talk about AI's impact sometimes on how he really changed the game of basketball. He changed, and it wasn't always necessarily on the court. It's what he changed off the court. That's what really was impacted, is how he changed the game when it came to off the court stuff. Obviously, that was great to see. Obviously, tributes, obviously, big games, highlights. AI is probably a lot of people's favorite players because of what he did back in the day. And, supposedly so. And I think it's great. But it's very interesting. I'm very glad, that y'all could join me on today's podcast. Thank you again for listening and tuning in with me. This was your GSMC Basketball Podcast. Don't forget to listen to other amazing podcasts on the GSMC Podcast Network. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, leave some stars, wherever platform you're listening to. Don't forget to comment, make something happen, Give your voice. Let your voice be heard. Hope you tune in with me for our next show, obviously, which will be dropping on Friday. So if we have more NBA news for you, we'll have it right here on the podcast. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.